The dust clung to Alara's damp skin, a second, grimy shroud over the worn fabric of her dress. It coated her tongue, parched and thick with unspoken pleas. She stood before the makeshift counter in the trading post, the rough-hewn wood digging into her palms as she gripped it, the only anchor in a world that had just pitched violently. Her fiancé, Silas, stood beside her, his face a mask of calculated indifference that chilled her more than open cruelty. He spoke to the burly man across the counter, the post owner, his voice low but carrying in the oppressive quiet, detailing the terms, the price. "Lost the claim," Silas said, shrugging slightly. "Debts need settling. Figure she's worth something to someone out here. Young, strong enough." Alara's breath hitched. Worth something. Like chattel. Like a horse or a parcel of land. Less, perhaps, for land couldn't feel the hot, tearing shame that consumed her. She hadn't known this was coming. Silas had said they were moving on, finding a new start. He hadn't mentioned she was the currency. Despair, a cold, heavy stone, settled in her gut. The air in the small, crowded post felt thick with the stares of the men gathered, curious, appraising. Their eyes stripped her bare, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in a way she had never known. Fear coiled within her, a venomous snake. What kind of someone would pay for a woman out here on the fringes of everything? Her future stretched before her, a terrifying void of uncertainty and potential brutality. The scent of stale tobacco, sweat, and dust was overpowering, suffocating. The post owner grunted, his gaze lingering on her, assessing her like a piece of livestock. He named a price, meager, insulting. Silas didn't flinch, didn't argue. He nodded, a deal done. Alara's vision blurred at the edges. This was it. Abandoned, sold, reduced to a transaction. The world tilted precariously. There was no one, no family left, no friends who mattered in this harsh land. Just Silas, who had proven himself a viper, and the prospect of whoever this transaction delivered her to. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. She wanted to scream, but her throat was tight with terror. All she could do was stand there, trembling, waiting for her fate to be sealed by men who saw her as property. Then, a voice cut through the hum of rough chatter, quiet but sharp, like flint striking steel. It wasn't addressed to Silas or the post owner. It was addressed inexplicably to her. "Get your things." The speaker stepped forward from the shadows near the entrance. He was a man, certainly, but unlike the others. His skin was the color of worn leather, his features sharp, eyes dark and intense. Apache. A gasp rippled through the post. He wore simple buckskin, moved with unnerving stillness, and held a rifle casually, pointed nowhere specific, but its presence was absolute. He wasn't asking. He was stating. Silas sputtered, outraged. The post owner looked wary. "Now hold on, you can't just..." The Apache's dark eyes shifted, landing on Silas, then the post owner. There was no threat in his posture, only an unnerving certainty. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His hand tightened imperceptibly on the rifle. "She is not yours to sell," the Apache said, his gaze returning to Alara. His eyes held a depth she couldn't fathom, neither cruel nor kind, simply assessing. Then he looked at Silas again, and his voice dropped, losing none of its cutting edge. "She's mine now." The air crackled. Silas, for all his bluster, saw something in the Apache's eyes, felt the weight of the rifle and the stillness that promised swiftness. He paled, taking an involuntary step back. The post owner, pragmatic despite his bulk, seemed to weigh the meager profit from Silas against the potential cost of antagonizing a man who moved like a shadow and carried a Winchester. He wisely chose silence. Alara stared, frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend this impossible turn. Sold, yes, but to him? Why? The fear was still there, a cold knot, but it was joined by a bewildering shock. This was not the future she had dreaded, but something entirely outside her imagination. Her gaze flickered from Silas's retreating form to the impassive face of the man who claimed her. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, she felt seen, not as property, but as something else, something unknown. He gestured subtly with his head towards the door, a silent command. "Get your things." The words echoed, a strange counterpoint to the despair that had engulfed her moments before. She didn't understand, didn't feel safe, but compelled by an unseen force, she turned, her legs shaky but moving, to gather the pitiful bundle that held her few possessions. The eyes of the trading post followed her, filled now not just with appraisal, but with a potent mix of fear and speculation. She was no longer Silas's to sell. She belonged to the quiet Apache with the gun. The journey away from the trading post was conducted in near silence. Alara followed the Apache's horse, riding the old mare Silas had deemed worthless. The man rode ahead, a silent, unreadable figure against the vast, indifferent sky. She stole glances at him, trying to decipher the meaning behind his abrupt intervention. Was this merely a different form of captivity? A darker fate? The fear lingered, a dull ache beneath the surface of her shock. Yet, he hadn't bound her, hadn't threatened her further than the implicit danger his presence carried for others. He hadn't spoken another word to her since the trading post. His silence was as unnerving as his sudden claim. The landscape stretched endlessly, painted in hues of ochre and brown under the relentless sun. Cacti stood sentinel, their forms spiky and defiant. The air was dry, hot, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. It was a stark, beautiful, unforgiving land, and she felt utterly alien within it. Her mind replayed Silas's betrayal, the casual cruelty of it. The humiliation burned anew, a constant reminder of how fragile her position had been, how easily she had been discarded. But intertwined with the hurt was the image of the Apache, his quiet strength, his interruption. Why her? A complete stranger, adrift and about to be sold into who knew what? It made no sense. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows that stretched and distorted the landscape, he led her into a hidden wash, sheltered by rocky outcrops. Here he dismounted, unsaddled his horse with efficient movements, and began to build a small, smokeless fire. He didn't invite her to help, didn't instruct her. He simply performed the tasks, his movements economical and practiced. Alara dismounted clumsily, her muscles stiff and aching from the unfamiliar riding. She watched him, uncertain of what was expected. Should she speak? Ask questions? The silence between them felt immense, a barrier constructed of language, culture, and circumstance. He finished with the fire, then took a piece of dried meat from a pouch and offered it to her. He didn't speak, just extended his hand. It was a simple gesture, practical, devoid of ceremony or expectation. Alara hesitated for only a second, her hunger overriding her fear. She took the meat, murmuring a quiet thank you. He gave no indication he heard her. He ate his own portion slowly, watching the flames. He didn't watch her with the assessing, dehumanizing gaze she had grown accustomed to in the white settlements. His gaze, when it rested on her, seemed merely observant, like studying a new, perplexing element in his environment. That night, he slept near the fire, while he indicated she should sleep slightly apart, near the horses. It wasn't a place of honor, but it felt like a boundary, a respect for her space in a situation devoid of her consent. She lay on the hard ground, wrapped in a thin blanket, the stars overhead impossibly bright and numerous in the absence of town lights. The desert sounds were unfamiliar, the whisper of wind, the cry of distant animals. She expected fear to consume her, the terror of being alone with this unknown man in the wilderness. But exhaustion was a heavy cloak, and beneath it, a nascent, bewildering feeling stirred. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't threatened her. He had, in his own strange way, saved her from a fate she truly dreaded. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was different. Less predictable, perhaps, but also less deliberately cruel than the path Silas had set her on. She drifted into a restless sleep, the image of his stoic face and the weight of his silent claim imprinted on her mind. The world was still uncertain, still dangerous, but the script she had thought was written had been abruptly torn apart. Days blurred into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the land. They traveled, not quickly, but steadily, deeper into the territory that was clearly his. Alara continued to follow, still uncertain, still fearful, but necessity and a growing, reluctant curiosity began to erode the edges of her terror. He never spoke unless it was absolutely necessary, usually simple directions given with a gesture or a single word in heavily accented English. He taught her implicitly through his actions how to ride better, how to read the subtle signs of the land, where to find water. He provided food, built shelter at night, maintained a vigilant watch. He was a constant, silent presence, a shadow that moved with purpose and competence in a world that remained a mystery to her. She observed him constantly, his patience with the horses, his skill with the rifle bringing down small game for their meals, the way his eyes scanned the horizon, missing nothing. He was self-sufficient, attuned to his surroundings in a way that was both impressive and intimidating. He was not like any man she had known. The men in the settlements were loud, often drunk, their motives transparently selfish. This man, quiet strength, as she began to think of him internally, was an enigma. He never looked at her with desire or contempt, only that same steady, assessing gaze. He respected her physical space, maintaining a distance that felt both proper and alien given the circumstances. There were no demands, no expectations beyond simply being there. Her initial fear slowly began to transform, not into comfort, but into a kind of wary respect. She started to notice small things. He always made sure she had water first. He chose campsites that offered the most shelter from wind or sun. He never complained, never seemed weary. His resilience was a quiet force of nature, and his protection, though unspoken, was absolute. One evening, a rattlesnake slithered too close to their camp. Before Alara could even cry out, the Apache moved with blinding speed, dispatching the snake with a single, precise strike. He showed no urgency, no bravado, simply dealt with the threat. Later, he looked at her, his expression unreadable, but she saw something in his dark eyes that quieted the tremor in her hands. A simple acknowledgement of danger averted. She began to feel a faint stirring of something other than fear or despair. A sense of dignity, perhaps. He hadn't bought her to exploit her weakness, but for some unknown reason, he treated her with a silent form of respect. It was not the respect owed to an equal, not yet, but the respect given to something under one's protection. She started to help with the camp chores, skinning game, awkwardly at first, gathering wood, tending the fire. He didn't praise her, didn't overtly acknowledge her efforts, but he didn't stop her. Slowly, haltingly, a partnership born of necessity began to form in the vast silence of the wilderness. She was still his possession by the crude terms of the trading post, but his actions told a different story, one she was only just beginning to read. The scar left by Silas's betrayal began to ache less, replaced by the sharp, present challenge of survival in this new reality and the quiet mystery of the man who had claimed her. Weeks passed, marked by the changing light and the deepening bond of shared silence and necessary action. They had reached a more permanent camp, nestled in a hidden canyon, a few simple structures blending into the rock, a place of quiet strength and deep connection to the land. It was here, in this place that felt both ancient and lived in, that Alara began to shed the last vestiges of her old life, the fear and shame that had clung to her like the desert dust. She had learned to move with more confidence, to anticipate needs, to find a rhythm in this unfamiliar world. The Apache, whose name she learned was Chaitin, had not changed, his stoicism unwavering, but the silence between them had softened, becoming a comfortable, shared space. One afternoon, the quiet was shattered. A small group of riders, white men, rode hard into the canyon entrance. Leading them was Silas. His face was a mask of furious determination, resentment burning in his eyes. He hadn't forgotten, hadn't let it go. He had tracked them. Chaitin moved instantly, melting into the shadows of the rocks, rifle in hand. He hadn't instructed Alara, but she knew what to do instinctively. Disappear. Seek cover. She scrambled up the rocky slope behind their dwelling, finding a vantage point where she could see without being seen. Silas and his men dismounted, calling out challenges, threats. Silas wanted her back, claimed she was stolen property, and demanded compensation. His words were full of bluster, but laced with a desperate greed and wounded pride. Chaitin didn't respond with words. He responded with strategic movement, the glint of metal, the chilling, sudden crack of his rifle. One of Silas's men fell. The others scattered, seeking cover. A firefight erupted, echoing deafeningly in the canyon. Alara watched, her heart pounding, a different kind of fear seizing her now, not for herself, but for Chaitin, for this strange, quiet life they had built. She saw his fluid movements, his uncanny ability to use the terrain to his advantage. He was defending not just himself, but them, their fragile existence here. And in that moment, watching him fight for her, for their improbable shared space, something shifted inside Alara. She wasn't just property to be fought over. She was part of this, part of them. Seeing the wounded look on one of Silas's men who had taken cover near her position, a foolish, desperate act born of the fight, Alara didn't hesitate. She located a loose rock, heavy and jagged, and with a surge of unexpected strength, she shoved it down the slope. It tumbled, striking the man's arm with a sickening thud and a cry of pain. He swore, clutching his limb, momentarily incapacitated. It was a small act, but it was hers. An active participation, a rejection of her passive role. Chaitin must have seen or heard it. He didn't react overtly, but his resolve seemed to harden further. The fight was short, brutal. Chaitin was too skilled, too connected to the land he defended. Silas and his remaining men, rattled and injured, made a hasty, undignified retreat, leaving one of their number behind. Silence returned to the canyon, heavy and absolute after the violence. Alara scrambled down the slope, her legs shaky. Chaitin stood amidst the scattered dust and the lingering scent of gunpowder, his face grim, his rifle still held ready. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching. There was no surprise, no judgment, perhaps a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, recognition. He walked towards her slowly and stopped a few feet away. The silence stretched, different from their usual companionable quiet. It was charged with the aftermath of violence and the weight of her action. "You helped," he stated, his voice rough, a simple acknowledgement. Alara nodded, finding her voice though it was little more than a whisper. Silas. He would have. She didn't need to finish. Chaitin understood. He looked at her again, not with possession, but with a new depth. The transaction in the trading post seemed a lifetime ago, a crude beginning to something unexpected. He hadn't bought a possession that day. He had claimed a future he hadn't perhaps anticipated, one that now included a woman who was finding her own strength in the harsh landscape, who had chosen to fight alongside him. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Instead, he extended his hand, not offering food this time, but simply offering connection. Alara, no longer the trembling woman sold like chattel, no longer defined by abandonment and fear, reached out and took it. Her hand, calloused and strong now from the demands of this life, met his. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of partnership, of two survivors finding an improbable path together. The harsh land had tested them, cruelty had threatened to break her, but in the most unexpected of circumstances, with the most unexpected of men, she had found not only survival, but a quiet, fierce dignity and the strength to claim her own place. Hope, it turned out, could bloom even in the dust, resilient and true.